The next step we must complete in our stamp project process is to do something called stretching a canvas. So first we need a board to work on. We need our watercolor paper for the project. And then we also need tape and a Sharpie. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like when we stretch this canvas. It's going to be really important to make sure you secure your canvas to your board. Otherwise, it's going to kind of have a ripply effect when we start to add water to it, and it's gonna look really warped. So to stretch a canvas, the first thing I want to do is make sure my canvas is on my board, not hanging off my board. I really wanna make sure it's on there, secured all the way around, and the whole thing is evenly on the board. So I'm going to tear off tape. I want to make sure my tape is long enough to go down the length of my paper. So I'm going to first try to get a clean border of tape on my paper. Try to line up my tape so it looks even all the way down and secure it to that board. So there's a good even strip of white all the way down. If my tape is coming at an angle, I'm not gonna have a clean line. So it's gonna be really important just so that way later we have a nice border of white around our stamping project. So I'm gonna do this on all 4 edges. Again, this is called stretching your canvas. Even though we're not working on actual canvas, it is just watercolor paper. The process is the same. If we were to be working on a canvas, like a professional painter, we do that by actually stretching the canvas over the edge of the wooden frame and stapling it down. But we are just using tape and paper. So I want my border to be pretty even to what I have on the left side. If I move it up too much and my paper's not covered, that's not gonna be good. And then I don't want it to be angled because then I have this weird white bar here. So try to get it as even all the way around as you can. Carefully place it. If it seems like it's in the wrong spot, don't stick it down yet, lift it back up and try again. Then I carefully secure that. This one looks pretty even with this one, so I'm gonna move on, get it nice and clean and tidy around my border. And I'm gonna do it on this side as well. I want that same edge. And then I'm gonna tear off this last piece and do this along the top. And then the final thing I need to do is put my name somewhere on my tape, not on my paper. And I'm just going to label that with my first and last name. I'll just put my last name though. And then what period this is. So maybe I am 3rd period on a purple day. So I'll write 3rd, P for purple. If I'm on a white day, I'll write 3W. And that is how we stretch our canvas and prep our paper for the final. The next thing I want to do when creating my background with the bleeding tissue paper is very carefully, with my pre-cut bleeding tissue paper colors, I am going to create my background. Remember, this is when we chose the complementary color pairings. So for my background, I want blue-green, which means my stamp ink will need to be red-orange. When I am doing my blue-green background, I'll have all of my bleeding tissue paper, and this basically just means that when it gets wet, the color bleeds out of it onto the paper. So in order to make this stick, I will just dip my paintbrush into my water bowl. You don't want to work too far ahead and get the whole paper wet because then it is just going to dry before you get there. So just work in small sections at a time. Get your paintbrush wet. I'm just going to start in the corner and work little by little. Then I'm going to pick my first little section of paper. I'll put that right up to the edge. I don't want any white space. And then I'm just gonna go back over it with my paintbrush, and you can see that the color is starting to bleed out. Since I am mixing 2 colors together, it is okay that there is going to be maybe some blue in my green and vice versa. Some overlapping is okay. And then I paint over that, and as you can see now it's turning green. I don't want to work too far out like I said, but I do want to have enough water out here that the next piece of tissue paper does stick to the watercolor paper. Then I lay that down, and the water will kind of take it and flatten it out anyway, but it's good to go back over it. And then we'll let these sit on the drying rack for a day or two, get them completely dried out, and then later we will take off the bleeding tissue paper, and the results underneath are really neat. Okay, so you'll do this around your whole page, get the whole thing filled. Make sure to try to stay within your tape, but going all the way to the edges of your tape. If you're doing something like this where you're mixing two colors together to get one of those intermediate colors or those tertiary colors, you will probably have a couple different versions of the colors. So here I've got a light blue and a dark blue. You may have that same color palette, and that's okay. And then I'll put another blue here. And this is how we work with bleeding tissue paper. You want to make sure that you've painted all over that piece of tissue paper so that way it sticks to the paper, and then as it dries, all of this pigment or color that is saturating this tissue paper bleeds out onto the white paper and leaves really nice results. So now that I have finished filling my paper with bleeding tissue paper, the entire thing is covered edge to edge all the way to my tape. There's no white space, nothing is left out. So as you can see, there's lots of overlapping, which is good because those colors will blend together and bleed together nicely. And then eventually we will take the tape off and we'll reveal that nice white clean border. Some of your papers may get a little bit of bleeding of color into your white border. It just happens when we're working with water. So if it does happen to your paper, it's okay. But the whole point of that white border is just to keep a nice clean edge that separates the edge of the paper from the edge of what you have created. So that is just really for an overall presentation purpose. But if it happens, it's okay. Things do happen when we work with water, and it kind of has a mind of its own. So just try to ignore it if it does happen. This may have some water puddling up, and as you can see, you may be able to tell that the paper is warping a little bit. If that happens, it's okay. I can flatten those out later on with a book. Once they're all dried, I can stack them together under heavy textbooks, and it should kind of flatten out your papers. But we will take these to the drying rack very carefully. As you can see, I've got lots of water around my tape, and in the middle, if I'm tipping this, it's gonna run. So try to carry it as straight and as carefully to the drying rack as you can, and then slide it onto your shelf. Then in the following classes, we will take these tissue paper pieces off once it's all dry, and it will reveal the background. One example that I had started last year but never finished, I did red orange for my background, and as you can see, it's a nice like watercolor blended type of color. So it does give you a nice soft finish, and that's why overlapping is good too, because there's lots of different variation in color.